Welcome to episode 119 of the Reds Unrestricted podcast. I'm your host, David Comerford, and I'm joined by James Martin to discuss the 2-0 win over Wolves and preview Sunday's game against Manchester United. So it looked here like Liverpool were heading for yet another draw until inside the last 20 minutes when Virgil van Dijk finally gave the Reds the lead. And then just 4 minutes later, Mohamed Salah doubled that advantage, Liverpool prevailing 2-0 against Wolves, the team who'd beat them 3-0 about a month ago. So it was nice to get revenge on that front. It's a result that leaves them 6 points outside the Premier League's top four, behind Tottenham Hotspur. They do have a game in hand. And it's worth noting as well that technically Newcastle would be in the top four if they win their game in hand. But I think everyone is maybe assuming that they might run out of steam a little bit. So we'll see how it pans out with that one. Let's start with our three-red match reviews, though, James.
Yeah, I went with more like it. Definitely a much improved performance, like you say, a marked contrast to the 3-0 against the same opposition not all that long ago in the grand scheme of things. Thought the defence looked a lot better. I know we've kept, I think, 4 clean sheets in the league on the trot now, but this looked by far the most secure of that set. So that was encouraging. And then finding a way to grind out the win as well. That was the main difference. I mean, we saw against Crystal Palace, there was just no cutting edge at all. We've not scored beyond the 50th minute, or I think we've done it once in the last 14 games or something. So that was a nice change of pace. Yeah, it's still not the Reds that we know and love, but it's getting closer.
I agree with that. And we still need to find a formula that allows us to, I think, be solid defensively whilst reaching the attacking heights that we've hit. I mean, one thing that intrigued me this week, I was looking at an article about Barcelona because Xavi made a comment, I think, last week saying, they were the best attacking team in Europe or the most exciting, certainly. So the article was going through and it was ranking all like the teams in the big 5 leagues with all the attacking metrics like expected goals, chances created, things like that. And in a lot of them tables, you see Liverpool in the top 5, in the top 10 still. And I think that emphasises that, I think they're even having more shots than Arsenal. We know how good Arsenal have been this season. That emphasises that actually going forward, while things have been a little bit dysfunctional at times, Liverpool are still creating like very high volumes of chances, and they look like still quite strong as an attacking force. But these past couple of games, it's been like maybe a little bit more defensive solidity, but has that kind of come at the expense of that attacking threat, which was actually looking really strong. So I still think Klopp needs to find the balance between those two things. In terms of my 3-year match review, I've gone with one ugly again. And it touches on really something that you were mentioning there, James. I mean, this Liverpool team, I think, especially in the 1920 season, but to a degree, in 18-19 and 21-22 as well, built a lot of its success on winning games ugly and on winning when it wasn't at its best. To the point where it came to be an assumption for us that we would prevail. And really, after that game against Palace at the weekend, it was kind of a reflection that I had. Like the Liverpool of previous years would have won that, even if they had played, as badly as we did for large periods. And I just felt like we weren't able to really recapture that. I mean, I was looking through all the games this season, and if you're looking at games where we have, won ugly, I think, that Newcastle game in August where Carvalho scores the really scruffy winner. And obviously Leicester would be the biggest one when we profit from 2 own goals. And in a otherwise poor performance. But other than that, that was really it. So that was what was really encouraging about last night. I mean, I got into a bit of a discussion on Twitter about whether you would constitute that as an ugly win. I just think, the fact that we created kind of one decent chance before we scored, or certainly before the disallowed goal with that Elliott header, didn't necessarily look like we were going to be able to score, in my opinion. And I think even the goal was a little bit ugly in itself, to be fair, with the rebound too. Well, it was a quality delivery from Trent in the first place. So that was really pleasing to see that return. And the other thing I would say is along the similar lines as you, James, about the defence. And you bang on with the clean sheets. I mean, the clean sheets that I've always thought are kind of overrated. I mean, Liverpool have, in the past, have had some really solid defensive performances, been beaten by a worldie, no clean sheet, and then there's been times they've ridden their luck so much and got one. Newcastle's probably the best example of that recently. But even Everton and Palace, they didn't have too many chances, but they both hit the woodwork. Last night, though, I think much more solid. Obviously, Canate coming back as well, big boost. Alisson with only one real save to make in the game, which I think was quite an easy one. So that was really good to see as well. So sort of, if we can kind of take that solidity and maybe be flow a little bit better as an attack, that we did yesterday, then it's something to build on for sure. Just before we move on to some of the players, James, Liverpool used a new midfield yesterday. I'm fairly certain that hasn't started before in Fabinho, Elliott, and Bajcetic, and then an attack as well, who haven't started together as a three. They've only started together as a four. What did you think of those kind of new setups from Klopp?
I mean, yeah, there were definitely promising signs. Fabinho in particular was by far the most improved. I don't know whether you can attribute that to the new midfield three he was part of. I don't really know what to attribute it to be honest, but it was a pleasant surprise seeing the sort of old Fabinho back. He was snapping into tackles. They weren't just breaking up counter attacks. They were setting Liverpool on their own way as well. Particularly in the first half, there were 2 or 3 instances where he would win the ball back, and then Liverpool would be away and having a chance at that end, which was really positive to see. That's sort of the balance that Klopp has to strike. We've been talking about striking balances a lot already, but with Fabinho and with Bajcetic, it's a case of, well, who do you play where when you've got them both in the same midfield? Personally, I do prefer Bajcetic in that deeper role as well, where Fabinho was playing. I thought there were moments again where he looked a little bit uncertain when he drove forward. There was maybe a pass on and he wasn't sure when to play it, where to play it. It's not even a criticism because he's so young. He's playing a completely new position. He'd been playing at centre back until not too long ago, so I wouldn't dig him out for it. But I thought there were those moments again. But on the other hand, with this new midfield, you've got Elliott, who is, of course, a very natural attacker, a very natural progressor of the ball. I thought he made the right side look a lot better. His interchanges with Trent, with Salah, that's always what he brings to the team when he does play in that right-sided midfield role. But there's a balancing act to be done there as well, because, I mean, what's been talked about a lot is of course, the defensive impact of playing him in the middle. I thought maybe because Fabinho and Bajcetic were the other two in there today, that was maybe mitigated. Sorry, yesterday, that was mitigated to some extent. Like we said, Wolves didn't have many big chances. There weren't too many scary counter-attacking situations, even when Adama came on. So that was managed quite well. But I suppose on the flip side, you're bringing him in for his attacking presence in the team, and then he missed a sitter, which could have proved costly. So yeah, it's there were things that worked and things that didn't with that trio. I wouldn't be averse to seeing it again in some guys, but yeah, I think maybe if the sort of the rest of the formation was tweaked into a kind of more of a 4-2-3-1, maybe that's the future of that particular trio, because then you can have sort of Fabinho, Bajcetic as the sort of double pivot, if you like, with Elliott with even more freedom in that kind of number 10 role. So yeah, there's things to work with there. And as for the front line, I thought it worked quite well. The result skews the analysis so much because, like you say, we were 20 minutes from another Palace game, and then we say the attack was completely blunt. There weren't enough high-quality chances, and that is true to some extent. But that's where we are at the minute. If the defence looks solid, then the attack's not going to be completely free-flowing. I mentioned in a piece actually that it's basically it's interesting the seasons you picked out to compare it to. You skipped over 2020, 2021, which I think is possibly the best parallel at the minute, in the sense that in the run in there, Liverpool sort of battened down the hatches. It wasn't the Liverpool we'd grown accustomed to, but it was an effective one at grinding out results, narrow results, often based on clean sheets. And I think obviously players are coming back from injury, so it's not the same sort of crisis, but there's been a crisis in recruitment. The midfield does not have the personnel it needs to have, even with everyone fit, to be the Liverpool that Klopp wants the team to be long term. So I think until we reach the transfer window, we are sort of in that crisis mode, and that means trying to keep things tight, and the attackers just making the best of what they can. And yeah, I don't necessarily think this front three clicked together amazingly well, but they all have bags of individual quality, and ultimately that was enough with a bit of help from Van Dijk, of course.
Yeah, it's easy to forget how effective Liverpool were at the end of that 2021 season, I suppose. And I mean, with these kind of new selections, it's just, you look at the Liverpool lineup yesterday, and the midfield does still stand out as a weakness, certainly, I think, in terms of inexperience and Fabinho being out of form. And then with the front line, it's like, part of me wonders if Nunez and Jota are too similar to be kind of starting together. Nunez is getting better on the ball. I mean, he deserves credit for that. When he first came in, I was thinking, maybe he is going to be someone who, let's just get him on the ball in the penalty area. But he's been better with that than I thought he would be. I just think still that you want kind of an attacker in there who's more comfortable on the ball, more comfortable kind of with the link up play side of things, and even dribbling too. And that's maybe where I'd want Diaz in the team, who's going to be back in a couple of weeks, or Gakpo, for example, maybe even Firmino too. I think the balance might have been a little bit off. That's not to say both of them didn't play well in their own right. Obviously, Jota gets the assist for the goal, and arguably should have had an assist for that disallowed goal. Just while we're on that, actually, what did you think of that decision? I didn't actually sort of see it back properly. I just knew that he'd obviously awarded the foul, but what did you make of that?
I thought it was a bit of a shocker, to be honest. I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with him saying that Jota's fouled this man. I think you're still playing with the meaning of clear and obvious, and I think you're sort of on the edge of that to call that a foul. But to then not go back and see why Jota was sort of sprawled at the feet of, I think it was Max Kilman at that particular point in play, is what was really baffling to me, because he'd essentially been hauled to the ground and then taken out Max Kilman's feet in the process. So if you're going to disallow the goal, you then have to go back and give the penalty, I think, which wasn't even talked about on the commentary I was listening to. But yeah, I mean, it's I don't understand it. I'm glad we won, put it that way. Otherwise, I'd be even more fuming. But still slightly fuming, given that I went for the bold call of triple captaining Nunez in Fantasy Premier League this week, which horrendously backfired. But yeah, no, it was a bad call for me.
Yeah, I think it's when the referee goes over to the monitor, they're going over with the intention to overturn it. You think maybe should the referee? I mean, it's always going to be in the back of their mind, but should the referee be going over and just the assistant referees, instead of saying, "I think this is a foul, go and have a look," just go and check that again, just to make sure you're happy with the decision. But that doesn't seem to be the way that they do it. So I wonder if that would have been just sort of generally a better way to operate. But you already mentioned Fabinho, who I thought had one of his best performances of the season last night. I mean, those moments where he's kind of winning the ball back, setting us on the front foot, it's like you could easily have forgot that the rest of the season had happened watching those. And also we've got to be careful to not get carried away, because I think that he's had kind of good games here and there this season. I think some of his best games have been at the World Cup as well. And that's when I kind of thought, oh, he did just need a rest. He is just knackered. Now that he's kind of got that, he'll be fine. He'll be back to his best. That kind of didn't materialize. So you're still kind of trying to work out what it is and whether the solution's been found. But certainly much better than him yesterday. Much more like his old self. And one of the players to touch on is Virgil van Dijk, who obviously scored. But I thought, apart from that, James put in a really solid defensive performance too, to follow up on the weekend where he was arguably Liverpool's best player.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's another one where I think all Liverpool fans will be naturally cautious anyway, because on an individual level and on a team level, we've seen so many sort of promising moments where it looks like things are back to their best and then they're just not. And I think maybe a word of caution on Wolves as well. Obviously, it's easy to talk about the improvement given that they put 3 past us so recently, but they're not a free-flowing, free-scoring team. They've They signed Kalajdzic, didn't they, in the summer, who then was unfortunately injured basically straight away. They've been lacking that kind of focal point basically ever since. So it's not necessarily the biggest test that the Liverpool defence will have all season, but yeah, I mean you can only defend what's in front of you, and Van Dijk did that very well. He looked, yeah, I suppose that's more sort of imperious self that we're used to, even when someone like Adama came on. Obviously, he's the sort of player who can cause that threat. He's one of the few who could maybe beat Van Dijk in a sort of foot race, but that didn't materialise. I mean, credit to the midfield for that as well, sort of cutting down the transitions, those moments where Van Dijk has been made to look more vulnerable this season. They didn't really come about, but yeah, when those individual duels were happening, Van Dijk never looked in danger of really coming out on the wrong end of them, which again is ties in with my 3-word summary. Really, it was just a step in the right direction. I'm not going to get carried away, but it was nice to see.
Yeah, he needs to he certainly needs to keep that up over the run-in, but really positive signs from him over the past couple of games after what's been kind of a tricky season. Before we move on to the weekend and the Manchester United game, James, is there anybody else who you feel stood out yesterday and deserves kind of an honourable mention?
I'll give Tsimikas an honourable mention. It's a tricky one given that, before the assist he maybe hadn't done too much, but I suppose by the same token he looked pretty solid defensively. There was one interception. I can't remember if it came before or after his assist, to be honest with you, but it's a very dangerous ball to break, or at least it would have been. And it was one of those balls that was sort of curling in behind to the right winger, and he's on the stretch, sort of cut it out and then got straight back on his feet and tackled him, because by cutting it out he took the momentum out of the pass but hadn't fully stopped it, and then he was straight back up, won the tackle. Dangerous situation snuffed out. And then, yeah, that telling contribution for the assist, lovely little interchange with Gakpo after he'd come on, and then he made the pass to Salah look easy, but you see those cutbacks go wrong a lot. So yeah, I think it was quite a Robertson-esque performance, really, which is always the highest praise you can give Tsimikas. Yeah, he was defensively solid for the most part, and then had his say in the final third, even if maybe we'd have wanted him to be a bit more active throughout the game. He came up in that moment, so I'll give him a mention.
Yeah, I think he stuck with it yesterday, is what I'd say for him, and the same could be said for Liverpool. Really, really pleasing to see the team continue to show belief. I think after it was been really easy to let heads drop after this disallowed goal, especially given what you were saying, James, about how few kind of goals they've scored late on in games, or even in the second half of games recently. But they kept fighting through it and got what feels like a really, really big win. It's only part one, though, of a kind of double header this week at Anfield that's been billed as a season defining. And I fear every kind of sequence of games between now and the end of the season is going to get that label. But certainly one of the biggest matches of Liverpool season any year, really, on Sunday as the Reds host Manchester United at Anfield, 4:30 kickoff there. Obviously, last weekend, James, we saw United almost dethrone Liverpool as Carabao Cup holders. Not the most illustrious title, but still, obviously, their first trophy for 6 years. So I just wonder generally, before we talk about the Liverpool game specifically, what have you kind of made of their improvement this season? I mean, how skeptical are you about it, and especially kind of the level of praise Ten Hag has received?
It's tricky. Like, on the one hand, Pep Guardiola had a point. He's saying, Manchester United have spent, 1.1 billion net over the past decade or whatever it is. It's it's almost a minimum requirement that a manager can come in and get performances up to this level. But on the flip side of that, many managers have tried and failed, and equally that spend is spread out over those managers. So the squad did look like a bit of a sort of mishmash of ideas, of philosophies. Obviously, Ten Hag was backed as well, brought in a fair few of his own players, but again, you'd say that's happened before and hasn't really worked out. So, I'm not too skeptical of it. I do think it's worthy of praise, and certainly I'm more worried about facing them than I have been over the past couple of seasons. But equally, it's not like they're invincible. That they've definitely improved, but they are in the early stages still of this project under Ten Hag. I don't know whether it's fair to necessarily draw comparisons to early Klopp just yet. I don't think necessarily Ten Hag will go on to be that sort of figure. You know, he'd have to be exceptional if he did. But you know, there's maybe some parallels there in the sense that you can see the direction they're going in, which hasn't been the case for the last decade really. But they haven't reached it yet, so there's room to upset them. I thought even in that Carabao Cup final, a couple of moments for Newcastle, if they'd gone differently earlier on, would have been a very different game. There was a very dangerous cross that came in, and just no one was there to stick it in the back post. Sir Maximin as well, sort of danced through and forced a good save out of De Gea at the near post. So yeah, it's one that's still there for the taking. Liverpool shouldn't go into it thinking, "Oh, this is Manchester United. They're back. There's no way we can beat them now." But it will definitely be a harder task than it would have been even 12 months ago.
Yeah, the money thing is the big question mark, and you know the spending has been incredible since Ferguson, and I understand why a lot of people look at that and say, "Yeah, this is where United should be." Why is Ten Hag getting so much praise? He is only where he ought to be, given the resources he has at his disposal, and obviously the money they spent last summer. I think they spent it in excess of 200 million, and that's obviously completely understandable. The things I'd say on the other side of that are how many people, in spite of that, expected United to finish in the top four this season. You know, very few probably. I didn't, and they're going to do it comfortably. If anything, they're looking upwards in the table, and I think generally as well, United just look like a serious football team again. Every time you watch them, you're like, it's not the finished article, but this isn't the kind of, United finished second under Solskjaer. This isn't anything like that. That was a team who, rode its luck a lot, and you were like, how on earth are they there? But with United, they look kind of befitting of where they are in the table. And I just think he's managed to, to be able to do that, given the level of dysfunction we've seen at United, shouldn't be kind of underestimated as an achievement, and certainly a lot of managers have failed to do that. And he's also been able to kind of unite the dressing room too, which is really important. So he's done like he's done a comprehensively good job so far in terms of how he's managed the kind of dynamics at the club, I think, as well as kind of obviously the on-field stuff, and obviously a couple of the players they bought in the summer in Martinez and Casemiro have made huge impacts. But if we look at the game, and you kind of mentioned this in your previous answer, James, but I think I'm right in saying that Man United haven't won at Anfield, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, since the 14-15 season, when Mata scored twice. That feels like, I mean, we would have both grown up in a spell where Man United were, kind of the undisputed kings under Ferguson, and victories at Anfield weren't all that irregular. But that certainly feels like one of the longest runs that I can remember, if not the longest, without that victory. I mean, how nervous are you this time that United are actually capable of ending that? Because, like I say, they do look now like a much more of a force than they have in the past.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I'm impressed at that run. I'm rubbish at these sort of football stats. I just watch the games and they go in out and one ear out the other. So yeah, I wouldn't presume to correct you, but that does seem incredible. So yeah, I mean, first and foremost, what a record that is. Credit mostly to Klopp for that run. But yeah, of course, you have to be nervous that it'll end at the weekend. I wouldn't write Liverpool off, but even with the sort of steps in the right direction, we saw them before Real Madrid, and then an informed opponent came to town and blew it away. Liverpool showed it could compete in those sort of games. Obviously, it ran into that 2-goal lead, and then it was individual errors really. So that could have been very, very different. So yeah, you'd hope that Liverpool can do the same sort of damage they did to Real Madrid, and then manage to do that while tightening up at the back. It's exactly the same dilemma we've been talking about on and off throughout the whole podcast, really. But yeah, there's ways Liverpool can hurt Manchester United. It's just I'm very wary of the ways that Manchester United can hurt Liverpool as well. Marcus Rashford being a big one. I think we've got a piece coming up from Josh Williams today about how Konate could be the answer to that. He was preferred in the Champions League final last year, essentially to deal with that kind of similar sort of threat in behind, that directness, that pace. we couldn't field him against Real Madrid this time, and you'd argue he was missed, particularly with Gomez having a bit of a horror show on the night. So yeah, that'll be a battle to watch. That'll be very interesting. But yeah, I think it comes down to how tight Liverpool can keep it. I think going forward, the likes of Nunez, the likes of Salah can produce those moments where they'll be able to find the goal. And obviously Anfield will be well up for it, like we saw against Real Madrid. So yeah, there's reasons to be optimistic, but at the same time, it's a bit of a scary one.
Yeah, Matt Addison and I had a conversation on the last episode about whether or not this is kind of a must win, and Matt didn't necessarily think so. And I think with the kind of 3 points in the bag from Wolves, we don't need to necessarily overreact if Liverpool don't win. But you hope that we can kind of, with it kind of being that cliche of a derby game and how you can kind of defy the form book in those. I think certainly the gulf between two sides of the table, hopefully Liverpool kind of close that up and show the best version of themselves in that one. And, there is kind of reason to feel more optimistic now, I think, off the back of obviously the results against Real Madrid and Palace kind of sapped all that, but now a little bit of a coming back. So it's kind of the emotional roller coaster continues with that. I mean, you're right to mention Rashford, obviously. I mean, his record's insane. I think I was wondering how kind of close he was going to get to, the Vardy record of consecutive goals. But I think there was kind of one game where he didn't manage to score. Other than that, he'd be kind of pushing it, if not overtaking it already. I mean, it's crazy the regularity of his goals at the moment. But he seems to score against Liverpool, certainly at Old Trafford every year. The one that worries me, kind of the fresh worry, and he didn't play in the reverse fixture, which incidentally was a game that I think Liverpool actually launched the Ten Hag era, because if we remember where United were in the first couple of games of the season, this was really the win that they used as a platform, which is unfortunate. But the player who worries me is Casemiro, to be fair, and he obviously isn't going to be necessarily the most direct threat, but you just feel like United can cope so much better with adversity having a player like him in the team, and they can ride out the spells of pressure Liverpool are going to put them under. And that's before you consider his ability to kind of dominate in the midfield as well. And just, that kind of that gamesmanship, that guile kind of thing, he's kind of unmatched in that field. And so he's the one that I look at and think makes Man United kind of a much more fearsome opponent, certainly, in addition to kind of obviously a few of the players who've improved. But, he's definitely the centerpiece of that. So let's see what Liverpool can do. I mean, it would arguably be the best day of the season so far if Liverpool can get this victory, because as United get better, they get more unlikable. So it would be much more satisfying to land the blow on them this time. But let's finish off by looking at Liverpool's potential lineup. If we assume, James, that Robertson will come back in to the side on the left, what other changes would you be looking to make from the team from yesterday, if any at all, obviously?
I mean, I'd be shocked if Elliot keeps his place. No disrespect to how he did against Wolves. Like I say, he had his moments, but it's not that sort of game. Liverpool needs to be as sort of tight as it can in the middle. There will be transitions that hurt them. For all of Manchester United's improvement, they are to some extent still a transitions team. Like you would say with early Klopp, it'll be interesting to see how they adapt when teams start changing how they approach games against them. That's always the sort of the litmus test of teams who are heading in the right direction, that they always reach that sort of crossroads. So yeah, Liverpool don't want to make it easy for them. They want to make it as tight as possible in the middle. So I think the options aren't inspiring. That's sort of the problem with the midfield at the minute. But I imagine Fabinho, Bajcetic will keep their place, and then maybe they're joined by Henderson as just a very sort of workmanlike midfield. Yeah, I don't know whether that'll be the answer or not, but I think that's probably what Klopp will do. In the attack, it's hard to call. I think maybe knowing Klopp, it could be a game where he sort of springs what would be a bit of a surprise at this point and sort of chucks Firmino back in there, just as the most trusted lieutenant over the years. He knows the system inside out. Klopp's going to want to have that sort of pressing performance. He knows that's a sort of reliable way that he can still hurt teams, especially teams who are intent on playing out from the back, which you would class Manchester United as. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him come in through the middle, and then maybe Nunez and Salah either side.
Yeah, and we've got a free midweek after this game, so Klopp maybe doesn't have to worry as much about kind of fatigue as he will do next weekend with the second leg against Real Madrid coming up after that one. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Thanks very much, James. I should have mentioned at the top of the podcast actually that James is a writer at Liverpool.com, and I'll put the link to his Twitter in the profile, and do read all of the articles that James posts on there. So yeah, we'll be back after the Man United game. If you're listening on an audio platform, please take the time to give us a positive review. I think on Spotify it's just a star rating, so a 5-star rating there would be hugely appreciated. You can also subscribe to the podcast so it appears in your feed, and you can put notifications on as well. And you can also do that on YouTube. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and also like the video and comments as well if you enjoyed it. So thanks very much for listening. And like I say, we'll be back after that Manchester United game to see if Liverpool have managed to beat their biggest rivals. But until then, take care.